In 1945, Christmas Eve, I was on Tinian Island. We had our first Japanese air raid then. So what we'd done before, because we knew the Japanese were going to come over and start bombing the B-29 bases, and we dug a community foxhole out in front of our tents, about 2 or 3 feet deep. And the idea was when the shrapnel bombs went out and came in, the shrapnel would pass over the hole and we wouldn't get hit by shrapnel. And so we got our first air raid. I heard the air raid siren, then the searchlights start flashing through the sky, and I could see it caught 1 or 2 of the bombers every so often. There's probably about 20 Japanese bombers up there. And so when I heard the siren, I was up and out of my tent and dove into the foxhole. Well, that was a mistake, because 2 big guys who were a lot slower than me came and dove in on the and right on top of me. So you learn that's smart, and you learn some hard lessons in the military. So from then on, when the siren went off that we were getting a bombing attack, I waited a while, let the other guys get in, and then I jumped in on top of them. This all happened in 1945 also. It's 75 years that the Battle of the Bulge happened in Europe. And this was the last big battle, and probably the most ferocious battle going, because the Allies were approaching in France, and that was the Bulge. That's why it became the Bulge. And there's a reunion on it, and the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge was on, I think, last week. But it was the big battle of the war, and it was a surprise battle because Hitler wanted to knock out the invasion and stop the invasion, so he had young kids in there and men 60, 70 years old fighting. And the Germans, a big snowstorm came up, and it had been gone for 2 or 3 days. The snow was just, and ice and rain and everything else. And so the Germans made a surprise attack. And then the battle started. And the fighting actually became obscured. And out of that came a story that I heard and years ago. So I went ahead and finished the story and called it A Christmas Eve Party. And I'm going to read it to you. They should not have been flying that night. It was Christmas Eve in 1945 at an advanced P-47 fighter base in northern France during one of the worst winters of World War II. Earlier in the day, on December 24, the squadron commander received orders to suspend flying because of the continuing bad weather. A major snowstorm practically shut down the war for the past 4 days. Just before it hit, the war turned particularly nasty as the Germans counterattacked the Allies, who were turning their northern flanks and starting to win the war. A sudden snowstorms and ice fogs obscured Allied and enemy forces. What began as battles between skirmishes became skirmishes between patrols of small groups separated from their units. Each side fought phantoms, real and imagined, that suddenly materialized in front of them just as quickly as they faded back into the fog and the snow. American, British, RAF, and German Luftwaffe pilots flew in and over boiling oceans of clouds, hunting each other. More than one tired and frustrated pilot was swallowed into a sudden opening, thinking that he could see the ground, and it was called quickly closing. They called them sucker holes then, because the pilots thought that they could see the ground and they had plenty of room, but then they went into it and they found out they're close to the ground, and that was it. A lot of that, not a lot, but accidents happen that way. They thought they were attacking an enemy airplane down there or a ground target, but they just didn't have enough altitude to pull out. Exhausted pilots and ground crews welcomed the stand down for the holiday. When the chaplain heard that the operations were suspended, he quickly organized a Christmas Eve party. We'll have cookies, fruit punch, and sing carols. After the service, Santa Claus will give presents to some of the orphans from the village. We'll have a real old-fashioned Christmas Eve, he said. Dismayed pilots and ground crews were expecting something a little stronger than cookies and fruit punch. So, while they helped decorate the mess hall, they planned another party after the chaplain went to bed. The colonel agreed to donate a case of good scotch he scammed on a recent flight to London. A French jazz band from the village enthusiastically volunteered the music after the mess sergeant mentioned a couple of canned hams, several cartons of cigarettes, and a Mickey Mouse watch for the leader thrown in to complete the deal. British pilots from the Royal Air Force Spitfire base nearby promised to bring a busload of French girls, birds they called them. When the carol singing began, a call from the wing commander came that a platoon of Americans were trapped in a little crossroad valley village, trapped by a fast-moving German motorized unit, and since the squadron's base was on the edge of the bad weather, the 40 or so miles from the village, the commander wanted volunteers. Every pilot volunteered for the flight. I need some guys to get over there and slow up the Germans. We've got a tank unit on the way, but we need to buy some time until they can get there. Within 30 minutes, every flyable P-47 was airborne toward the village. For almost an hour, the fighters dove through the billowing snow into the valley, bombing and strafing until they ran out of ammunition. They kept harassing the Germans with low-level passes until what was left of the column turned back into the advancing American tanks. When the tired but happy pilots returned to the mess hall to start their late party, the chaplain was waiting. "Boys," he said sadly, "those little French birds you got tired of waiting and flew away with the Spitfire pilots." The French band decided they'd go back to their cafe after I've donated their hams to the orphanage. And the good father who runs the place sure likes his new Mickey Mouse watch. But I managed to save some cookies and fruit punch for you boys. Another call came in from the wing commander. The American tanks made it, and the American groups that were trapped there made it safely out of the village. As the pilots and ground crewmen ate their cookies and drank fruit punch, they all agreed with the smiling chaplain, it was a great Christmas Eve. That was my Christmas Eve story. I've got some more that maybe I can talk about next year. Thanks for being with us again, and I'll have some more stories out of the big pile of file cabinets I just came up with last night. And so anyway, we'll see you again next week.